and the song, and Tom Dunham is going to help us with invocation. Mary Volk, if you could please come to the front to help us with the Pledge of Allegiance, followed by the patriotic song.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
A little God bless America. God bless America, land that I love. Stand beside her and guide her through the night with the light from above. From the mountains to the prairies to the oceans white with foam. God bless America, my home, sweet home. God bless America, my home, sweet home.
May we assume an attitude of prayer, please. May all of us remember with love and compassion that day. May we grieve with those who still mourn, and share memories with those who cannot forget. May we draw strength from those who bravely responded and gave their lives to save others. May we stand with strangers who became neighbors that day, and remember the generosity and hospitality. Above all, God, may we remember your faithfulness and learn to trust in your unfailing love. Amen.
You can be seated. You can look on your table for a listing of upcoming meetings of the Columbia Club. Thanks to our programs chair, Trina, who is winding down her tenure in the coming year. We have Max Harper coming in, along with connections from Graham Honaker. We have an incredible program for the remainder of the year. Graham's going to touch on that in a second. Past President's Day is September 30th, with induction of new officers October 7th. So if you can think of anybody who hasn't made it to a meeting in a little bit, please let them know about the September 30th Past President's Day. If you'd like to join Laura Berry, Trina Raudenbush, and Nancy Ulrichs to review applications for our community grants, please let Ms. Kelly know. Mr. Graham, if you wouldn't mind coming up and giving us a plug about some of the events we have going on this fall, I'd appreciate it.
Good afternoon, everybody. You can do better. Good afternoon, everybody. We really do have some great programs, and we'd love to see us fill the room and get some more tables here full. So next week we've got Leonard Hoops from Visit Indy. Obviously a lot going on right now with the city of Indianapolis, and he is a star. He's one of the best at what he does in the country in terms of running the Visitors and Convention Bureau. So please join us for Mr. Hoops. 9/23, 2 weeks, a special program to my heart. I know Tom Dunham is not going to miss this one. We had at Butler, there was a Netflix series on our mascot, Blue 4. If you haven't seen it, it's on a show appropriately called Dogs. It's about a 40-minute piece which talks about the mascot, but also Michael Kaltemark. It's a really touching story. I won't spoil it, but you should watch that. Well, Michael and Evan Krause, Evan is now taking over for Michael as the handler for the dog, are coming to talk about the Netflix show, and they are bringing Blue 4. So you'll want to watch your plate while you eat. But really would love.
Do I need to order some dog treats?
I think it'd be a nice touch. I'm sure the Columbia Club can do some nice ones. So we'd love to see you there. Past President's Day. Where's the time gone? Where are you going to be past president? You look like this. Yeah. I always remember Karen Burns. When I took over, Karen told me this club's been in existence for 100 years. Don't screw it up. I don't think I did, and I don't think you have either. October 14th, we've got Ethan Butte. I just met him 2 weeks ago. I met him on campus at Butler. He's got a son who just started. And I found out he's got a brand new book coming out called Human-Centered Communication, which I think is appropriate for us. The book is about, we're so into texting and email and getting back to what I think communication used to be. Like this, sitting across from somebody. Probably gonna try to bring my daughters to that one to show them that you actually can talk with somebody. Ashley Petrie from Indianapolis in an illustrated timeline will be here on October 21st. We'll have the Pacers Sports and Entertainment represented for the future of the Fieldhouse. And November 4th, a program really special to me, and a favor would be to get a really big crowd here, because we've got folks coming from out of town here. This is the 35th anniversary of the movie Hoosiers, and we've got several of the actors coming back, including Jimmy Chitwood. We'll have Bobby Plump, who, if you know Bobby, today's his 85th birthday, so reach out to him if you know him. And then we're going to have Angelo Pizzo come from Bloomington. He wrote the film, so would really love to see a great crowd there on that day. Times really well at the start of basketball season. And then finally we'll have Tara Klutz, Indiana State Auditor, coming as well. So a lot of great programs. I mean, this is a core feature of Kiwanis, is having great programs and learning. So hope you'll be there, but as important, reach out to somebody. Reach out to somebody who hasn't been here in a while. Reach out to a guest, a friend, and let's get these rooms full. Thanks.
We are missing one of our most seasoned members today. My dad, Don Neal, is going to come up to recognize Marjorie Laughlin ahead of her 92nd birthday.
Oh my gosh. June of 1979, my gosh. When Kelly first called me this morning, I really thought it was about a press release that was issued early this morning that said that Butler has finally been declared an accredited college. The degrees now mean something out of Butler. And now remember, Navy and Butler have no dogs in the fight, so we've got a goat gram that could come in and participate. But no, when Kelly called, it's a shame. Marge is not here for a good reason today. She's got a son that's in from California. And if I remember right, Marge had 7. My wife and I gave up at 5, trying to catch up to her. But a little kind of background, I know Tom Dunham and Tom Eubank were here. In 1987, the Kiwanis International Convention, I think it was Salt Lake, believe it or not, actually voted through that Kiwanis should have men and women as members. And that sounds kind of weird saying that in 2021, but there was a women's organization here called Zonta that went back to 1919. Tom, I didn't realize it went back that far, for the Women's Kind of Service Club. Very active chapter here. And so, and they didn't accept men. So that kind of changed the game back then. But of our first 4 members, we had Sarah Evans Parker, Marjorie Laughlin, Mary Marsh, Faye Williams, and really the quick, almost right next was Ann DeVore, who is our state auditor. So I was elected as the first president-elect. When the club was getting close to 500 people, to have somebody come in cold as the president was just not working. So I had to do my internship under Jim Blythe, Hail Mary, but so in 87 we came back and we got on it. So when I took over in October of 1988, Marjorie Laughlin was my membership chairman. Brought in 42 members, a bunch of those people still in the club, and very, very proud. Again, she was one of the first, I think she was the first woman auditor, treasurer, elected for the state of Indiana. And she's been always one of our best attendees and participants. But it's one little other quick, since she's not here, I can tell you. But I get the darndest call back in 2004, and it's from President Bush's secretary. Where does this come from? But she was originally from Indiana, and she goes, Mr. Steele, the president's coming to Indianapolis on about 7 days' notice, and it was over at the state fairgrounds. Can you round up 5 couples that are investors and that have been impacted by the 01-02 recession, of which some of these clients are still alive. They just couldn't believe it. But we got into the fairgrounds. I was not at the meeting. So Marge grabs me after the president's met with these 5 clients of ours and drags my wife and I up to the stage. The president speaks. Here's little teeny Marjorie Laughlin bullying through Secret Service, Indianapolis Police Department,
to introduce my wife, especially, not so much me, but my wife to President Bush. She's a fireball. She still is at 92 years old. But I'm sending her a birthday card today. I'm saying happy 59th. You don't want him to say happy 92nd, but quite a bit of history of the club. Thank you.
So, like Dad pointed out, please do think about dropping her a birthday card. We've been sending emails to Kiwanis throughout the year for their birthdays and Kiwanis anniversaries, but please let Marge know we're thinking of her. Today's speaker, Chief Thomas Neal, is Division Chief of the Indianapolis Fire Department, where he has served for 29 years. He is also the Task Force Coordinator, Program Manager for Indiana Task Force 1. Chief Neal has been deployed to many disasters across the country, as well as responding within the first 24 hours to the World Trade Center collapse on September 11th. Indiana Task Force 1 is prepared to respond to any natural or human-created disaster 24 hours a day. The team handles all hazards, from local search and rescue to a national large-scale incidents. The Federal Emergency Management Agency activated INTF-1 to provide emergency assistance for the areas impacted by Hurricane Ida in August, and they were deployed to the condo collapse in Seaside, Florida. I remember where I was September 11th, and I moved to New York the following year. I've always had a connection to New York. I saw my first Yankees game in the early 80s and ate at Mickey Mantle's restaurant. So it's hard to read some of the articles that you've helped contribute to in the last 20 years. So I appreciate you coming today, Mr. Chief Neal.
Well, thank you for the invitation. It's an honor to speak before the Kiwanis Club, and you know, I have been asked probably the last couple of weeks numerous interviews from various news stations here in Indianapolis, and you know, we just had one the other day, and someone said, "What do you remember about that morning?" And so I said, you know, I was coming off the firehouse. I wasn't with IFD then, we merged. I was a Warren Township firefighter before. And I just came home from the firehouse, and my wife had the kids up, and we were eating breakfast at the table. And of course, most mornings we had a small television on with network being shown, and they broke away to, you know, breaking news. And they showed the picture of Tower 1 with a hole in it. And they said, we believe an aircraft struck the World Trade Center Tower 1. So I'm like, that's kind of odd. Looks a little big for a small plane. I'm like, you know, you're trying to wrap your mind around what was going on. And then, so I said, I'm gonna get up and walk into the family room, turn on the big TV. Just about that time, I saw the NYPD helicopter swing behind Tower 2, and you saw a blur, and then you saw a big fireball. And at that point in time, I realized we were under attack. And so, you know, you look back on that day, and you know, it took us down a road that basically took us 20 years, right? Withdrawing our troops out of Afghanistan last week. And so it kind of put us on that path for 20 years. And so I'm going to talk briefly. There's a lot of pictures of what we saw in our first few days of Ground Zero. And mind you, this pile was 16 stories, 16 acres in space by 10 stories tall, not including the sub-basements. And we searched all of them, with the exception of the ones that were filling up by the Hudson River, because the slurry wall had a crack in it from just the impact of the towers. And so this is what the World Trade Center complex looked like on September 11, 2001 at 8:45 a.m. If you go to the next slide. And then, as we all know, this was what happened subsequent to the attacks from the aircraft flying into it. And if you go to the next slide. Okay, so do we have any engineers in the room?
Retired.
Retired engineers. So, in the fire service, is what's interesting is in the fire service, we're taught that a collapse zone of a building is 1.5 times the height of the building. So imagine a 110-story building and the collapse zone being 1.5 times the height. You're not gonna run far enough or fast enough to get out of its way. So the World Trade Center was designed to do exactly what it did. It was designed to collapse on itself. And if you go back to in the 70s when those were originally built, what did we use for fireproofing? Asbestos. And so we had sprayed on asbestos on all the steel structure. And then the main core of the building was the floor space. And they had no weight, relatively. All the weight of the floors were on the outside walls of the structure. And they had some stairways on the outside. And so when people said they were trapped, they could not get to those stairways because most of that debris from the aircraft or the shearing of the steel columns would prevent them from getting to those emergency exits. And so because of the heavy fire load, because of the aircraft, steel elongates at 1200 degrees. It didn't take long for the steel to start failing. And so the engineers of the building designed it. If there was a catastrophic incident, the floors would pancake straight down on top of each other. So that's what occurred. The outside shell kind of peeled away and fell away. So if you go to the next one, that's what it looked like from the aerial view. Okay, 16 acres in size by 10 stories tall. Okay, it also affected the surrounding buildings around the World Trade Center complex. So as you may know, World Trade Center 7 collapsed 5 hours after the initial attack because when the towers collapsed, it pushed the fireball out to the other structures itself. So buildings 4, 5, and 6 were also burning. Buildings 4 was part of the collapse of Tower 2, and so that's where we started our search activities. Next. So another news channel had asked us, what did you first see when you came over and looked at Mount Manhattan? So we actually took a picture of us coming over the crested hill, going towards the Lincoln Tunnel, and we saw the smoke. And I had been to the World Trade Center site back in 1998 as part of the Non-Lugar Diminution Act, which was the domestic preparedness program where we went to the 105 largest cities and taught weapons of mass destruction to our first responders and hospital emergency rooms. And so I realized, and my comment was, they're gone. All of it's gone. And they're like, well, where were they? I said, right where the smoke is. And so when we arrived down there and we got into Manhattan, we were directed by accident straight to ground zero. We were supposed to go to Jacob Javits Center, which was our base of operations at the time. And this is what you saw. Paper. Everywhere. Think about 210-story buildings of office space and their paper. And that's what we saw everywhere. And dust. The concrete dust was pulverized in such a fine dust. If you disturbed it, it would float in air for minutes. Almost like it was a liquefied particle. And so if you go to the next one. So these are some of the images that you start seeing. You know, you had FDNY and NYPD and Port Authority police officers looking and searching. The unique thing of it was these people, they may have been fathers, they may have been sons. They were looking for their own family members. Very similar to FDNY, IFD has a lot of heritage as far as families being in the fire service locally. So FDNY, it's been a huge historic presence in a lot of families over the history of FDNY. And a lot of these people were family members looking for their own. And so, if you go to the next one. So you had them scurrying around looking for areas of access into the rubble pile. And mind you, it's 10 stories tall. There's no space in between. So it was a pancake collapse. And so you think, well, there's gotta be void spaces. There was office furniture, there was filing cabinets, there were other things, furniture there that would provide a space for somebody that potentially could survive a collapse. But think of the sheer weight, the 110-story building coming down. It was all gone, all pulverized. Next, please. So when we talk about safety issues, when you start seeing some of these pictures that I'm going to point out, you'll realize it was a very dangerous site to work. There was no true concrete left. It was all pulverized and turned into dust. All the furniture was dust. Desks, office equipment was all dust. But once we started getting there, what arrives after a collapse? Heavy equipment. Cranes, front loaders, excavators. Those are the things that made our life even more dangerous, on top of pieces of the World Trade Center hanging off of other buildings. Remember when I said the outside skeletal fell away this way? Well, some of that was hanging up into other structures. We called those widow makers, because they could fall at any moment, and if you were standing anywhere close, you couldn't run fast enough, because you're talking several tons of steel falling to the ground. So we had to wear PPE while in the hot zone, and mind you, we wore respirators. Very similar to what's being worn today, but we wore what was best described back then was HEPA filters on a half-face mask. It's not the greatest, it's not the best, but it gave us some limited protections. And I say that with a tongue in cheek. Out of the 62 members that we deployed with, 42% have ill health effects from our exposures at Ground Zero, and we've lost 4 team members to cancer, presumed to have been caused by our exposures at Ground Zero. Okay? CO in confined spaces. Anytime we went into a void space, and there was many of them, we'd have to put a monitor down there to make sure it was good enough for us to go into, or we'd have to wear an SCBA, a self-contained breathing apparatus. Okay? We had to watch out for each other. Your head had to be on a swivel because there was so much movement on what was going on there. It was incredible. Okay? Large area, easy to get lost into the rubble pile. If you looked at the early days of 9/11, it looked like ants crawling all over the pile. Those were all the FDNY firefighters in the surrounding departments that chose to send their people there to help facilitate the search for survivors or recover those that were lost. They had to use an accountability system. Okay, heavy equipment was the biggest risk. They're lifting with cranes large sections of steel out of the World Trade Center. Okay, operators working long hours, not resting. You know, our typical day, from my day, started at 4 a.m. We had breakfast at 4:30, and we had a briefing at 5. We were on the pile at 7 a.m. We left the pile at 7 p.m. We got back to the Jacob Javits Center at about 10 o'clock, given that we got off the site on time. Many times we did not. And then your rest of your day kind of started with get something to eat, take a shower, and then you were required to do all your paperwork and get all that stuff turned in. You turn into bed about 2 o'clock in the morning, and in 4 hours, less than 4 hours after you really got back and you kind of started doing some stuff, you got to bed for 2 hours and right back up again, and it all started all over again. So long days, but the thing that probably kept us all going day after day, and this was 24 hours, it was the people who lined the street from the Jacob Javits Center all the way to the last checkpoint where they could stand, and they cheered us on to encourage us to continue our work and look for survivors. They had signs, they were clapping, they were cheering us on, and so that's what kept us going. Next, please. Okay, so this is what our work site looked like. It was a disaster in itself, okay? You had cranes, you had excavators, you had front end loaders. Mind you, when we first got there, our first assignment was to look and try to penetrate the tunnels from the federal building, which housed the US Post Office, into Tower 7. The reason why was there were some vaults that some alphabet agencies wanted to get to because they had evidence or other items that they wanted to get out of that building. We never got to the tunnels. They had all collapsed. And so we were moved to Station 10, what we called 1010 Command, which is Station 10. And has anybody been to the World Trade Center site? So Station 10 sits right on the corner of Vesey and Church. And if you go there now, there's a mural on the side of the building that depicts the events of 9/11. When we first got there, the debris pile completely covered the doors of the station house as tall as the doors were. It was about 25, 26 feet in depth. That's where it started. Each day, mind you, 12-hour operation shift, it moved. When you came back the next morning, things had even changed even more. They were moving so much material, tons and tons of material, every single operational period, it changed. What didn't change was it was a living, breathing pile. And I say that is, remember, the fires are burning in the rubble itself still. And so if you move something within that pile, it changes the complexity of the pile, and it could cause a flash fire. We had individuals in a void space. We took the monitor down there. We monitored the atmosphere. Everything was good. They went in the hole. Somebody moved something somewhere else in the pile, and it shot fire out of that hole. It literally went right over the top of them. However, one of our members was taking a break about 20 feet from the hole where they went into. He was drinking a bottle of water, and he got severely burned on his hands and on his face and his ears. He was 20 feet away from where that was, but it was such a fireball. And the thing I remember is the faces on the FDNY firefighters. They thought we had lost additional people. And so they were as much concerned about our own folks for the task force as they were looking for their own. They were concerned that we just lost additional personnel. Next, please. Okay, so you can see the various parts of the structure. So this was the Marriott Hotel. So those of you who had been to the site prior to the collapse, you know this was on the southwest corner of that complex. And it was kind of in between Tower 1 and Tower 2, right on that corner. And so some of the building withstood the collapse. A lot of it collapsed in itself. So, you know, we were searching all of this south division, is what we would end up breaking it down. And we had multiple teams there. So she just left. I was going to have her go to the next slide. Okay, again, hazards. So this is what our viewpoint was. Every morning when we would come to work, we would stand right outside the station, and this was our viewpoint. So this is what we've got to look at every single day. So a lot of hazards, a lot of moving parts there. Next, please. Okay, as you could see, we had conducted searches down in the subway tunnels, in the train station, in the train stations that were below World Trade Center 2, to look for anyone that may have been trapped down there. The other aspect of it was when we were assigned to a forward base of operations building, we chose the Deutsche Bank building, which was an 8-story building that was kind of tucked in behind on Albany Street, right behind the Bankers Trust building. So the Bankers Trust building was the black glass building that later, during the demolition phase of the Bankers Trust building, caught fire and it killed 6 additional FDNY firefighters. If you looked at the north side of that building, it had probably a 20-ton piece of World Trade Center 2 hanging out of the front face of it. That was the Widowmaker that we all knew we needed to stay away from. But the unique thing of it was when we chose our buildings to do our forward base of operations, we had to make sure they were clear. Check the elevators, because when they fell, it took all the power out. And so some people had suffocated in other elevators in some other buildings because they couldn't get out and they couldn't breathe in that heavy concrete dust. So we had to check our building, so we checked the roof, and on the roof, we found personal effects from the aircraft that struck Tower 2. In fact, one of the news agencies said, well, you know, can you tell us about one of them? And I remember clearly that we had a women's purse up there on the roof, and we opened it, and there was her boarding ticket to the aircraft. And we found some people's passports and some other personal effects from the aircraft passengers. So I hit the FEMA command post and asked for an FBI evidence collection team to come to our location to collect those artifacts, because you know, that was evidence. Those were things that people were there on the plane and they needed to recover those. Next please. And so as you get closer into the pile, you really get just the sheer massiveness of what that catastrophic event looked like up close. You can look at the pictures, and the pictures are only one-dimensional, right? When you look at it in real life, it's three-dimensional, and the thing that you can't see is the smell. So, you know, someone asked me one time to describe the smell. Well, it was rotted food, you had human remains, and it was just the rancid kind of burning smell of things still burning in the rubble. I pictured it as if this had to be hell, this had to be pretty close to what I would envision hell to be, and that smell. And so you just can't unmemorize that smell or what we saw. Next, please. So one of the things that we would do to go around to all the buildings, we would do building markings that it would indicate that a team had been there for this. This is Ohio Task Force 1. They found zero victims, and on that right side that said some floors are collapsed, okay? And they did the search on the 16th of September. So we had a marking system, so all the FEMA teams, every place where we went, we did the marking systems on the outside of the building in paint. We didn't want to put a sticker up or some other, we did it in paint. Because we wanted to make sure, one, it was seen, and there was no miscommunication about what had been done there. Because I think we searched certain areas of the World Trade Center, especially the shopping plaza underneath Tower 2, multiple times because people never did the marking systems. And so finally we said, okay, we gotta go down there one last time and we gotta mark everything. So we did, we painted everything. And so, but the unique thing is if you guys can see the writing and the dust, people were going around and leaving messages on building windows of their loved ones that they were missing. Or they would leave a phone number. You know, that's how they were trying to get their information out, because at the time when we were down there, all the cellular networks were down, no electricity. The lack of communication to be able to identify those people who were looking for loved ones or family members, this is their message. Or they began posting pictures on paper of their loved ones. If found, please call. And it was like a little tear-off at the bottom with their phone number on it. So, and that went all over South Manhattan. And so we saw a lot of this, and I could not find the picture of one that it still resonates with me today, is someone wrote on a picture window on a building that says, "You have awoken a sleeping giant." Think about what laid ahead of us. That's the first time we had been attacked since Pearl Harbor on our own soil. And it set forth events to come when President Bush made the determination to put soldiers in Afghanistan. Next, please. So here was the breakdown. So we have 28 teams that are scattered from East Coast to West Coast. Indiana sits in the Central Division. And so some teams arrived shortly after the event, Massachusetts and Pennsylvania was the closest teams to New York, so of course they were the first ones there. Ohio got there right before midnight on September 11th, and we arrived at 8:30 in the morning. So we drove 16 hours straight through the night, and we went straight to work at 8:32. On September the 12th, we began our work, and then we stayed there until September 19th when we got demoted, and we arrived back here in Indianapolis on September the 20th. Okay? Mind you, these are all the teams that were assigned to New York, and there were other teams that were assigned to the Pentagon. So we had 2 structural collapse sites working at the same time because of the attacks of September 11th. Next, please. Okay, so I work the day shift. A lot of pictures that certainly are unique to Ground Zero occurred at night. It took on a completely different personality at night because shadows and lighting became a huge issue. Not only a safety issue because you couldn't see void spaces, you couldn't see holes while you were working on the pile because you just couldn't get enough light. I mean, you had a rubble pile 10 stories tall by 16 acres, and you just couldn't light up where everyone was working. So again, this is just outside of Station 10, and if you notice the buckets, there was tens of thousands of buckets. People would move equipment and tools in buckets up the hill, up that rubble pile, and then you would remove debris by hand with a 5-gallon bucket, digging into void spaces to try and locate those that were lost. Next, please. Okay, and of course, in the first few days, it was total chaos at Ground Zero. So you would be standing there, just like these gentlemen were, and someone would notice something falling off of the building. Because people were, I would say, a little hesitant and needed to keep awareness of what was going on. So it may have been a piece of paper, but someone said, oh, that's a sheet of glass that's coming down. And then someone said, oh no, that building's collapsing. And then people would announce over a PA system, or air horns would sound for an evacuation of the site. And then the stampede of human bodies began. And literally you had to get out of the way or you were gonna get trampled. This occurred multiple times during an operational period. Okay? So you're constantly looking up, seeing where this stuff's coming from. Eventually, it just got normal of seeing things fly off of buildings, and it wasn't glass, it wasn't really heavy debris, it was paper everywhere. Next, please. Okay, again, just the shadows and just the sheer vastness of the destruction of the World Trade Center site was overwhelming. And so, again, a lot of times we would set and plan missions along with FDNY and NYPD. They were the lead, we were kind of just the force multiplier, so to speak, to help them search for the lost. Next, please. And so, again, crane work, excavation work, it wasn't just during the day, it was at night, and they moved people to the top of some of these large steel structures by a basket on a crane so that they could cut the steel and then tie it off and then move it with another crane. So I think at any one time there was probably, by the time we left, there was probably 12 to 15 large cranes working at the site, and then excavators and front end loaders, and you had various dump trucks. So a lot of moving pieces, and mind you, these guys were all union guys, and they would have worked long hours, and they would unwind doing their own thing. Instead of going to sleep, they would all kind of sit around and chit chat and talk, because it was hard for you to unwind from your day of operations. So, and what you saw. Next, please. Again, going back to the whole bucket brigade and seeing things move. Next, please. Okay, so every day we updated the plans of what we were going to be doing and what we were working on. So there was a number of teams assigned to Station 10 Command. And so each small section we would clear, and then once we cleared it, the best we could, the large heavy equipment would start moving additional debris, and then it would open up additional void spaces, which we would then search again. So, next please. Next. Again, look at the lighting and the shadows. Very difficult site to work on at night, as well as the smoke and the dust. Somebody's phone's controlling the lights. Next, please. Okay. So one of the things that was unique that we got to see firsthand was the amount of first response equipment that was destroyed during the collapse. So that fire engine that you saw previous is now sitting in the World Trade Center Memorial. That was ladder 3. That is, the whole front end is completely gone and melted from the collapse. And so this is actually me standing outside Station 1010 Command, and this is our med spec, Jackie Phillips, who has since passed away from cancers associated with our exposures there. So, next please. Again, just as you get closer in, you can see the sheer magnitude of the amount of destruction that occurred there. Next. Okay. And one of the things that we were assigned, you know, since there was aircraft involved, the FBI wanted any pieces or parts of any aircraft that we would find. So, how many have ever seen a black box from an aircraft? They're not black, they're orange. And so, why don't they call it an orange box? But we were looking for the black box. And so the unique aspect of how that fell and the collapse, we were actually finding aircraft parts below a lot of the collapsed structure, which was odd in itself. So next, 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 next. I'm not sure where that came from. That wasn't on my slide, but oh well. But one of the things that you probably didn't see, somehow that got attached to my presentation. One of the things that you didn't see was when we would recover someone, we were not allowed to remove them from the actual rubble pile. So there was actually a team of FDNY or NYPD and Port Authority police officers, and there were 6 of them. They would be notified and they would come up the pile with a Stokes basket, a body bag, and an American flag. And so, you know, the site was busy with activity. All the big heavy equipment, everyone yelling and screaming the best they could through respiratory protection. Some people didn't wear respiratory protection. But when we found somebody, when that team came onto the pile, there was a whistle that was blown or an air horn that was blown, and all work would stop. All work. All engines were turned off. As busy as the site was, you could literally hear birds chirping. And it would remain quiet, and people would stand at attention until they removed the human remains from the rubble pile in a Stokes basket, in a body bag with an American flag over it. And that occurred multiple times every single day, every time we were there. So, you know, we went with 4 canines. They're live find canines. What do canines do when they can't find anybody? They get depressed. So we had to play this little game of hide and seek so they could find people to bring their spirits up. Mind you, these are working dogs. These are search dogs, but they became therapy dogs. We would sit outside the Dutch bank building, and FDNY, NYPD, Port Authority people would come by and they would ask, hey, can we sit with your dog? We had 4 of them. And they just wanted to sit and pet a dog. Some of these people worked tirelessly for weeks or months, reporting back to continue to look for those that were lost. And so canine brought some sympathy, some normalcy back to their life. And so a FEMA photographer had captured several of the canines in action. And if you happen to go back to the World Trade Center Memorial, there is a section in the memorial dedicated to the canines. And so the last one perished, I want to say it was about 4 years ago. It was a golden retriever, and it was 16 years of age when it finally passed. But most of our canines died within a few years of their exposures. Again, think about if we're having health problems and their nose was to the ground, they're inhaling the dust just like we were. And some of those canines passed very quickly from various cancers associated with in a canine's life. So, but if you think about a 110-story building, you know, we found very little evidence of any real office furniture. But someone says, well, what was in the dust? So think about the people that still have not been identified, right? A lot of them disintegrated into dust. And so we had a retired NYPD officer who came and spoke to the team because she had retired and she was working for the Mount Sinai World Trade Center Health Program. And she had came to us to talk to us about how important it was to be involved in the program. And she told us a story. And we all came back with coughs, and we kind of jokingly, you know, told stories about the cough. But she told us a story about an individual who had a chest x-ray. They found some issues associated with his lung tissue, and they went in and did a sample, biopsy. And in that biopsy, it came back with somebody else's DNA. So, you know, it kind of hits home that some people were never recovered, and they were disintegrated into that dust. And so, in closing, if you have an opportunity to go to the World Trade Center Memorial, there was a wall. I'll try and get through this. There is a wall that has several thousand pieces of blue aluminum attached to the wall, and they move with the wind in the museum. And most people think, oh, that's a cool display, but it's the words that are written there. And then you read the plaque, and in the plaque, it indicates that that is the vault where they keep DNA samples and pieces of those that are still missing that we don't have the technology currently to identify. And so, to me, that's one of the more poignant aspects of the entire memorial is that wall. And so, and there's a saying on it that I'm sure I would get it wrong if I quoted it, but it's a very moving piece of that whole memorial. So, with that, thank you for having me, and I'll open up for any questions.
So we'll have 2 questions since we're at the end of our time, and then anybody wants to steal the chief afterwards. But Mr. Dunn, please go ahead.
Where was the amount of that destructive material sent to?
All of that material was sent to the Fresh Kills landfill, where the FBI then would sort through all of the debris. So they literally, if it was rubble and we got it out of a 5-gallon pail, it was sent through a shaker, and it would shake out a lot of the material. They would investigate it. If you look at some of the the artifacts in the memorial. They found people's rings, watches, necklaces, earrings. That was all being recovered at Fresh Kills landfill. So it was all being put on a barge and then pushed out to the Fresh Kills landfill, which is not in Manhattan. Yeah.
What was it that caused the death of the rescuers?
So, for the most part, we gotta thank President Obama for passing the John Zadroga Act, which was then the development of the World Trade Center Health Program, the Victims' Compensation Fund. In the World Trade Center Health Program, there's 68 cancers that are covered to help assist people that are suffering from those or who pass away, where their families can actually reclaim some compensation for their death caused by the terrorist activities that day. Two of our members, actually 3, have passed away from various lung cancers, and then one, Jackie, had passed away from bladder cancer.
All right, sir, thank you for your
Thank you.
Gary, this isn't a question, although you might know. I heard that there is going to be a memorial service over at, near the Historical Society where the pillars are.
Right.
The governor on September 11th about.
2 o'clock in the afternoon, yeah.
And then, Ms. Pat, I apologize, I missed you on the agenda. Would you mind saying a couple of words on Salvation Army's
But I don't
initiatives?
I don't want to interrupt this.
No, please go ahead.
Okay, so, I found that the Salvation Army is actually an extension of the downtown Kiwanis Club recently. Mary's nodding. Mr. Steele is on the board, Ms. Falk is on the board, and I'm on the advisory committee, and so is, Carol Orbison. And, Jay Brill recruited us, I owe him, and, we get the entire southern half of the state of Indiana, Indianapolis down, as I understand it, is that about right? And we're the chairs of the Red Kettle. So although Karen Burns is going to handle this club, we get the entire state. So if you have other people, that would be willing to work on the Red Kettle and donations, you can email me at the law firm, pmcrory@harrisonmorley.com, and I'll ask her to put something in the newsletter. And Carol has her own email, and then we'll pass it on to the actual people at the Salvation Army. We're going to have that'll delegate and assign. November 12th, I think, is the kickoff. It's at the Historical Society, and then by Thanksgiving there will be Red Kettles, as many as we can get out there. We'll do actual donations as well as the electronic stuff, and it'll go through to December 24th.
All right, thank you very much.
And we have a large goal, so.
Okay, great. And in honor of your time today, Chief Neal, we are making a small donation in your name to 913 Sports, which helps 50,000 kids a year with cycling to promote self-esteem and fitness. So thanks to you and your team for your service for all of us and from all of us. Please join us next week here back at the Columbia Club for Mr. Leonard Hoops, and meeting's adjourned.
Thank you.